Alex had always been the type to take evening walks to clear his mind. The small town he lived in was quiet, the streets often empty after sunset, with only the sound of his footsteps echoing in the cool air. But tonight, something was different. As he strolled down the familiar path, he noticed a figure standing near the edge of the forest. At first, he thought it was just another traveler or a person lost in the darkness. But as he got closer, he realized it was no ordinary person. The woman stood tall, her pale skin glowing softly under the moonlight. She wore strange clothing, a fabric that shimmered and shifted in a way that made it hard to focus on. Her eyes, deep and intense, seemed to glow with an unnatural light. There was something about her that made Alex stop in his tracks. She didn't belong here. She didn't belong anywhere he knew. "Can I help you?" Alex asked, his voice cautious but sincere. The woman turned slowly, her eyes locking onto his. She didn't speak immediately, just studied him with an expression he couldn't quite read. It was like she was weighing something, deciding whether to trust him. The air around them felt heavier, as if the world itself was holding its breath. "I don't need help," the woman finally said, her voice calm but firm. "I don't need anyone." Alex blinked in confusion. "You're lost, aren't you?" She tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing. "Lost." She repeated the word, as if it had no meaning. "No, I know exactly where I am. I've come for something, or someone." Her voice was strange, distant, like she wasn't entirely present in this world. Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She didn't seem human, not entirely, and yet there was something deeply captivating about her, something that made him want to help her, to know more about her. He took a tentative step forward, but she held up a hand, stopping him in his tracks. "Stay back," she warned, her tone sharp. "You don't know what you're dealing with." Alex hesitated, but his curiosity got the better of him. "I don't understand." "What are you?" "I am not here to explain," she interrupted, her voice growing colder. "You should forget you ever saw me." For a moment, they stood in silence, the wind rustling through the trees. Alex could feel her presence, like a magnetic force pulling at him, but he didn't understand why. There was something in her eyes that suggested a deep loneliness, but also an undeniable strength. "I won't forget," Alex said quietly, his words more to himself than to her. "If you need help, you can trust me." The woman's eyes softened for a fraction of a second before hardening again. "Trust," she laughed, a sound without humor. "You don't know me. You don't know anything about me. And you never will." With that, she turned away, her figure disappearing into the shadows of the trees. Alex stood there, staring after her, his heart racing. The encounter had been strange, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he hadn't seen the last of her. As he walked back home, the image of her glowing eyes stayed with him, lingering in his thoughts. Who was she? Why did he feel this strange connection to her? And why did she look at him as though she needed him, and yet wanted nothing from him? Alex didn't know the answers, but something told him this was only the beginning of an encounter that would change his life forever. For days after his strange encounter with the woman, Alex couldn't stop thinking about her. He tried to push it out of his mind, but her glowing eyes, her cold yet mesmerizing presence, haunted him. He couldn't understand why he felt so connected to her, even though she had made it clear that she didn't want his help or his company. Life continued as normal, but everything felt different. Every time he went for a walk, his eyes scanned the forest, hoping to see her again. His friends noticed he had become quieter, more distracted. He didn't tell anyone about the woman. It felt too strange, too impossible. But deep down, he knew he wasn't imagining it. One evening, just as the sun was beginning to set, Alex found himself walking along the same path near the woods where he had first seen her. His steps were slower this time, more cautious. Maybe he was hoping to see her again. Maybe he was just trying to forget. But the moment he passed the trees, a familiar voice stopped him in his tracks. "You again." The voice was unmistakable, cool and distant. Alex turned, his heart racing. There she was, standing in the same place as before, but this time, something had changed. She wasn't as distant. There was something in her eyes, something different. Her gaze was no longer just cold. It was intense, almost desperate. "I thought I told you to stay away," she said, her voice softer than before. Alex felt a strange pull toward her, a magnetic force he couldn't explain. He wanted to run, to walk away, but he couldn't. "I couldn't," he said quietly, taking a step forward. "I couldn't forget you." The woman's eyes widened, just for a moment, before they narrowed again. "You don't understand," she said, her voice trembling with something Alex couldn't place. "I don't want anyone's love. I only want your love, human." Alex froze, his heart pounding in his chest. "My love," he whispered, not sure if he had heard her correctly. She nodded slowly, almost as if she were speaking to herself. "Yes, your love. I need it, but I don't know how to ask for it. I don't want to be weak." Alex felt a rush of confusion. She had spoken so coldly to him before, and now she was saying these things. It didn't make sense. Yet, somehow, Alex felt like he understood. She wasn't just an alien. She was someone who had been through pain, who had experienced something that made her close herself off from others. "I can't give you what you want," Alex said softly, his voice shaking slightly. "I don't even know what you're asking for." The woman's face darkened. "I don't have time to explain it all," she said quickly. "But you're the only one who can help me." Alex took another step closer. Despite his confusion, despite the danger he felt in his chest, he couldn't ignore the pull. "How?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman studied him for a long moment. And then, almost reluctantly, she spoke. "You'll find out soon enough. Just know this. I don't want your pity. I don't need your sympathy. I only want your love, the love you can give me." Alex didn't know what to say. He didn't understand what she meant, but he could see the desperation in her eyes. Something inside him told him that he couldn't walk away this time. He wasn't sure why, but he knew he couldn't leave her like this. The silence between them grew thick as Alex opened his mouth to say something more, but the woman turned and disappeared into the shadows of the trees, leaving Alex standing there, alone once again. But this time, he wasn't just haunted by the memory of her. He was determined to understand. Alex couldn't stop thinking about her. Even after days of trying to go about his normal routine, Lara's words echoed in his mind. "I only want your love, human." He had barely understood what she meant, but something in his gut told him that whatever was happening, it was far bigger than he could imagine. That evening, he decided to go back to the forest. Despite the strange feeling creeping in his chest, he had to know more. Maybe it was the curiosity, or maybe it was the deep, strange connection he felt to her. But whatever it was, he couldn't ignore it any longer. As he walked through the trees, the air felt heavier than before, like the world itself was watching him. He wasn't sure if he was looking for her or if he was just drawn to the same path they had crossed before. But this time, he wasn't alone. Suddenly, Alex heard footsteps behind him. Not just one set, but many. His heart skipped a beat. He turned quickly, but saw nothing, only the whisper of leaves in the wind. He shook his head, telling himself it was nothing. But his instincts were on high alert. Before he could take another step, a group of figures emerged from the shadows. They were tall, cloaked in dark, metallic armor, and they moved with a terrifying precision. Alex's breath caught in his throat. These weren't normal people. They were aliens, and they looked like they were searching for something. One of them spoke in a language Alex didn't understand, but the tone was clear. It was a demand, not a question. He could feel the tension in the air, like they were closing in on something important. Someone. His heart raced as the leader of the group, a tall, imposing figure with sharp eyes, stepped forward. Alex instinctively took a step back, but the figure didn't seem to care. It was clear they weren't here for him. They were after Lyra. The alien leader spoke again, this time in broken English. "You've seen her. Where is she?" Alex froze, unsure of how to respond. He barely knew who they were talking about, but he had a sinking feeling that they were looking for the woman he had met. Lyra. He couldn't tell them anything, could he? He didn't want to. He barely understood the situation himself. I haven't seen anyone." Alex stammered, hoping they would buy his lie. But the alien didn't seem convinced. His eyes narrowed as he studied Alex, as if he could tell the human was hiding something. The leader stepped closer, his presence imposing. "Don't lie to us, human. She's here. We know she's here." Alex didn't know what to do. His mind raced for a solution, but before he could think of anything, he heard a voice, a familiar voice, cut through the tension. "Leave him alone." Lyra's voice was sharp and commanding. Alex turned toward the sound, his heart skipping in relief. There she was, standing between him and the aliens, her posture defiant, her eyes glowing with a fierce intensity. She wasn't scared. She was ready to fight. The aliens seemed taken aback for a moment, but the leader quickly regained his composure. "You're not going anywhere, princess," he sneered. But Lyra didn't flinch. "I'm not your princess," she said coldly. "And I'm not going anywhere with you." Alex's mind raced. Who were these people? What did they want with Lyra? And what was she, really? The questions were coming fast, but all he could do was watch as Lyra stood firm, determined to protect herself. Lyra glanced back at Alex for a moment, her eyes softening for the briefest second. It was as if she was telling him to stay out of it. But Alex couldn't just stand by and do nothing. He took a deep breath, stepping forward, ready to do whatever it took to help her. This wasn't just about a strange encounter anymore. It was about something much bigger. The standoff between Lyra and the alien hunters felt like it lasted forever. The air was thick with tension, and Alex could see the anger in the eyes of the aliens, the way they clenched their weapons. Lyra stood tall, unflinching, her eyes locked on the leader of the group, who had stepped forward again. "You're not leaving," the alien leader growled, stepping closer, his hand resting on the hilt of his weapon. "We have orders to bring you in, alive or dead." Lyra didn't move, her gaze icy. "I've been hunted my whole life. You think you can scare me?" Alex could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He didn't know how to help. He wasn't a fighter. He wasn't prepared for this. But the look in Lyra's eyes, the same strength, the same determination, made him realize he couldn't just stand there. Not anymore. "Lyra." Alex called out softly, taking a step toward her. "What's going on? Who are they? What do they want from you?" Lyra turned to him then, her expression softening for a moment, though only for a second. "I'll explain later," she said quickly. "Just stay back. It's not safe for you." Alex opened his mouth to protest, but before he could say anything, the alien leader shouted an order. The group of hunters moved forward, their weapons raised, ready to strike. Alex's heart raced. He had no idea what to do. He had no weapons, no training. He couldn't fight them, but he couldn't let Lyra face them alone. Suddenly, without warning, Lyra moved. Her body was a blur of speed, a flash of light, as she struck out at the leader, her hands glowing with an energy that Alex had never seen before. The energy crackled around her, lighting up the forest in bright blue sparks. She was no ordinary alien. She wasn't just running from something. She was running toward something, toward her own destiny. The leader staggered back, shocked by the sudden force of her attack. "You think you can stand against us?" he spat, though there was a note of fear in his voice now. Lyra didn't answer. She was focused, her attention fully on the group. With a quick motion, she sent a pulse of energy toward one of the other hunters, knocking him off his feet. The others hesitated, clearly unsure whether they wanted to risk fighting her. They had never expected this level of power from her. Alex watched, amazed. He had known something was different about her, but he had never imagined this. She wasn't just some lost, confused stranger. She was powerful, dangerous, even. He felt a mix of awe and fear. "I told you," Lyra said, her voice cold and calm. "I don't need anyone's help. I can take care of myself." The alien leader scowled, raising his weapon to strike. But before he could, Alex stepped forward. "Wait," he shouted. "Why are you chasing her? What does she mean to you?" The leader paused, eyeing Alex with distrust. "She's a fugitive, a royal from a dead empire. Her people were wiped out in a war, and now she's all that's left. We're here to capture her and take her back to face the consequences." Alex felt a chill run down his spine. Royal? Empire? He had no idea what kind of trouble he had stumbled into. But one thing was clear. Lyra wasn't just running from these aliens. She was running from something much bigger and much more dangerous than Alex had ever imagined. "Why not just leave?" Alex asked, his voice steady, even though his heart was racing. "Let her go. She doesn't want anything from you." The leader's gaze hardened. "You don't understand, human. We're not asking for permission." Before the situation could escalate further, Lyra took another step forward, her eyes never leaving the leader. She raised her hand once more, and the ground beneath them trembled, sending the aliens into a defensive stance. She wasn't going to let them win, not without a fight. Alex had seen enough. He didn't know how to stop this, but he knew one thing. He wasn't going to let Lyra face it alone. He had to stand by her, no matter what. The tension between Lyra and the alien hunters hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Alex stood close by, his heart racing as he watched Lyra, powerful and unyielding, face down the group of enemies. Her energy pulsed around her, a blue glow lighting up the dark forest like a beacon. The aliens hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. They had never seen anyone like her before. Lyra's eyes scanned the group, her expression fierce. The leader, who had been so confident just moments ago, now looked uncertain, his grip on his weapon faltering. Alex could see the difference in her, the way her shoulders were tense, as if she was holding back a storm. She wasn't just fighting to protect herself. She was fighting something deeper, something that ran far beyond these aliens. With a quick motion, Lyra pushed the leader back, sending him crashing into the trees. The other aliens immediately lunged forward, but Lyra was faster. Her energy wrapped around them like a shield, knocking them back with each step. It was clear she wasn't afraid to use her power, and no one was going to stop her. But Alex noticed something else. As the last of the aliens were forced to retreat, Lyra's strength seemed to fade. Her energy flickered, and she staggered slightly, as if the effort had drained her. Her glowing eyes dulled, and for a moment, Alex saw a hint of exhaustion behind the cold exterior she always put up. He stepped forward, his instincts pulling him closer. "Lyra," he asked, his voice hesitant, "are you okay?" She looked at him, her gaze softening for just a moment. But then she quickly turned away. "I'm fine," she said, her voice sharp and distant again. "You don't need to worry about me." But Alex could see the strain in her posture. She was hurt, but she wasn't ready to admit it. It was like she had built a wall around herself, one she refused to let anyone break down. It frustrated him. He wanted to help, to make things right, but she kept pushing him away. "I don't know how to help you if you don't let me in," Alex said quietly, taking a step closer. "I don't understand all of this, but I'm not going anywhere." Lyra flinched slightly at his words, and for a brief moment, Alex saw something in her eyes that he hadn't seen before. Vulnerability. Fear. It was a crack in her armor, a glimpse of the person behind the powerful, untouchable figure. But before he could reach her, she closed herself off again, her expression hardening. "You don't understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You can't understand what I've been through. I don't want you to. I can't afford to care. I can't afford to need anyone." Alex didn't know what to say to that. He couldn't imagine the pain she had endured, the battles she had fought alone. But something inside him told him that she didn't have to face everything by herself anymore. He had already crossed a line by getting involved, and there was no going back. He wouldn't leave her, no matter how much she pushed him away. "Maybe you don't need to do this alone anymore," Alex said softly, his voice filled with determination. "I'm not leaving you, Lyra. I don't know what it means, but I'm here. I'll help you however I can." Lyra's eyes flickered, her walls cracking just a little more. She looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. And then, with a small, almost imperceptible sigh, she nodded, though her face remained distant. "Stay out of the way," she warned, though there was no real threat in her voice. It was as if she were saying it more to herself than to him. "If you truly want to help, don't make me hurt you." Alex didn't back away. He wasn't scared of her. "I won't make you hurt me," he said firmly. "But I'm here for you, Lyra. You don't have to push me away." For the first time, Lyra didn't argue. She just looked at him, her expression softening ever so slightly. The distance between them was still there, but something had shifted. Maybe, just maybe, she was starting to believe him. The days after their confrontation with the alien hunters were filled with uncertainty. Alex and Lyra kept moving, never staying in one place for too long. Each time they found a safe spot to rest, Alex would look over his shoulder, always expecting the hunters to catch up. The feeling of being chased, of running from something dangerous, never left him. It was starting to take a toll on both of them. Lyra, on the other hand, seemed unaffected by the constant danger. She was always calm, always composed, as though the chase didn't bother her. Alex couldn't understand it. How could she be so strong, so distant from everything that was happening? They had made their way through dense forests, hidden in caves, and trekked across open fields. Alex didn't know where they were heading or why they were running. But every day, Lyra seemed to grow more and more distant. Her once bright eyes had started to lose their spark. She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting something deeper, something inside her that Alex couldn't reach. One evening, as they walked through a narrow path between towering rocks, Lyra suddenly stopped. Alex, walking a few steps behind her, didn't notice at first, but when he caught up, he saw the look on her face. It was a look he had never seen before. Fear, real, raw fear. "What is it?" he asked, his voice steady but filled with concern. Lyra didn't answer right away. She was staring ahead, her eyes narrowed, as if searching for something or someone. "They're close," she said, her voice tight. "They'd found us." Alex's heart skipped a beat. He felt the weight of her words. He didn't know who they were, but he knew they weren't good news. Lyra turned and grabbed his arm. "We need to keep moving. Now." Before Alex could respond, a loud sound echoed in the distance, like a roar, but metallic, almost like the hum of a spaceship's engines. It was the unmistakable sound of something big, something dangerous. And it was getting closer. Alex's mind raced. He had no idea what they were up against, but the fear in Lyra's eyes told him everything he needed to know. These weren't just alien hunters anymore. They were something far worse. "They'll keep coming for me," Lyra said, her grip on his arm tightening. "They won't stop until they have me, and I can't let them win." Alex felt a surge of protectiveness. He didn't know everything about her past or why she was being hunted, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let her face this alone. "We can fight them," Alex said, his voice steady. "I won't let them hurt you." Lyra turned to him, her face hard, her eyes searching his. For a moment, there was silence. The sound of the approaching threat grew louder, closer. Alex knew they didn't have much time. "You don't understand," Lyra said softly. "I can't let you get involved. I've hurt too many people to let someone else get caught in this mess. You don't know what I'm capable of." Alex took a deep breath and met her gaze. I don't care what you've done. I'm not leaving you. Lyra's eyes flickered with something. Surprise, maybe even gratitude. But it was gone almost as quickly as it came. She nodded, though her expression remained tense. Fine, she said, her voice firm again. But you need to stay out of my way. Alex didn't answer. He didn't need to. He was already prepared to stay by her side, no matter what came next. The sound of the approaching ship grew louder, and Alex could feel the ground beneath them vibrating. The chase wasn't over. In fact, it was just getting started. The air felt thick with tension as Alex and Lyra stood in the narrow path, the sound of the approaching ship growing louder by the second. It wasn't just the noise that made Alex's stomach twist with fear. It was the way Lyra was standing, her face hard, her body tense. She was preparing for something, and he knew it wasn't going to be easy. We don't have much time, Lyra said, her voice cold but urgent. They're getting closer. We need to move. Alex could see the way her hands clenched at her sides, her body coiled like a spring. He had seen her fight before, but this felt different. She wasn't just facing a group of alien hunters anymore. She was facing something much bigger, something that had haunted her for far too long. Where are we going? Alex asked, his voice steady, though his heart was racing. What do we do now? Lyra didn't answer at first. She just stared ahead, her eyes scanning the horizon as if looking for an escape. But Alex could see it in her eyes. There was no escape. Not from this. They'll keep coming for me, she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. No matter where I go, they'll follow. I've run too far, too long. It's time to face them. Alex frowned. He didn't like the sound of that. You're not alone in this, he said firmly. We'll face them together. Lyra's gaze shifted to him, her eyes filled with something he couldn't quite read. Fear, determination, maybe even regret. For a moment, she looked like she might say something, but then she turned away, shaking her head. You don't understand, she murmured. You don't know what I've done. Alex felt his heart tighten. It doesn't matter what you've done, he said softly. I'm not going to leave you. Not now. Not ever. Lyra's expression softened, just for a second. Then, without another word, she started moving again, her pace quick and sure. Alex followed closely behind, trying to keep up with her long strides. The sound of the ship was almost deafening now, vibrating through the ground beneath their feet. They were running out of time. As they reached the top of a ridge, Lyra stopped, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the sky. There's no more running, she said, her voice filled with finality. It's time to face them head on. Alex felt a wave of uncertainty wash over him. This was it. They were about to confront the very thing that had been chasing Lyra all this time. And yet, despite the fear gnawing at him, he couldn't back down. He couldn't leave her. Lyra turned to face him, her eyes filled with determination. Stay close to me, she said, her voice sharp, and stay out of my way. This is something I have to do. Alex nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. I'm right here, he said, his voice steady. The ship finally came into view, hovering above the trees, casting a long shadow over the land. It was massive, unlike anything Alex had ever seen. The ship landed smoothly, and as the door opened, a group of armed figures stepped out. Lyra took a deep breath, her posture straightening as she prepared for what was to come. This was no longer just about survival. It was about confronting the truth of her past and whatever had brought her to this point. The leader of the group stepped forward, his expression cold and calculating. You're not getting away this time, princess, he said, his voice filled with menace. Lyra's eyes locked onto his, her expression unwavering. I'm done running, she said, her voice filled with a quiet strength. Alex took a deep breath, his hand tightening around a nearby rock. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to leave Lyra, no matter what came. The atmosphere was thick with tension as Lyra stood before the group of armed aliens, their weapons raised and ready. The ship loomed behind them, its doors still open, casting an eerie light across the scene. Alex stood just a few feet away, his heart pounding in his chest. He had never imagined he would be in a situation like this, facing off against alien hunters with the fate of someone like Lyra hanging in the balance. Lyra didn't flinch. Her eyes were locked on the leader of the group, her expression cold but filled with an intensity that Alex had never seen before. This wasn't just a battle for survival. It was something much more personal for her. She had been running for so long, and now she had finally decided to stop. Alex could see it in her eyes. This was the moment when everything would change. "You've been a problem for too long, Princess," the leader said, his voice cold and full of authority. "You've caused too much chaos. It's time to end this." Lyra stood tall, her face showing no fear. "I didn't start this," she replied, her voice calm but firm. "But I will end it." The tension between them grew thick as the group of aliens closed in. Alex could feel the air crackling with energy, both from the group and from Lyra. He knew she had power, but he had no idea just how much. It was as though she was tapping into something deep within herself, something that had been buried for far too long. One of the aliens took a step forward, his weapon aimed directly at Lyra. Before Alex could react, Lyra raised her hand, and the alien was sent flying backward, crashing into the side of the ship with a loud thud. Alex's eyes widened. He had never seen anything like it. Lyra's power was unbelievable. "Stay back, Alex," Lyra said, her voice low but filled with authority. "This is my fight." Alex wanted to argue, to tell her he wasn't going anywhere, but he could see the determination in her eyes. He took a step back, his heart still racing, but trusting that she knew what she was doing. He wasn't about to get in her way. Lyra turned back to face the leader. "You think you can just take me back like I'm some prisoner," she said, her voice steady. "I've been through hell, and I'm not going back." The leader sneered. "You have no choice in the matter." With a flash of movement, Lyra was on him. Her hands crackled with energy, and in an instant, she had the leader pinned against the ship, his weapon falling from his grasp. The rest of the aliens hesitated, unsure of what to do. Lyra was far stronger than they had anticipated, and now they were seeing her for what she truly was. "I am the last of my kind," Lyra said, her voice fierce, her grip tightening around the leader's throat, "and I will not let anyone take me back." The leader's face turned red, his breath labored, but Lyra didn't let go. Alex could see the struggle in her eyes. She was fighting not just for her survival, but for something deeper, something she had been running from for so long. With a final push of energy, Lyra released the leader, sending him crashing to the ground. The other aliens quickly backed away, realizing that this wasn't a fight they could win. Lyra stood over them, her chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. For the first time, she allowed herself to relax, even if just for a moment. The danger was over. Alex stepped forward, his voice low but filled with admiration. "You did it." Lyra turned to him, her expression softening for the first time. "We did it," she corrected him. Alex smiled, feeling a rush of relief. They had won, but more than that, they had come together in a way that neither of them had expected. For the first time, Lyra wasn't running anymore. She was standing tall, and Alex was standing with her. As the dust settled and the aliens retreated, Lyra looked at Alex, her eyes filled with something new. "Trust. There's still a lot I need to figure out," she said softly. "But maybe I don't have to do it alone." Alex nodded, a sense of peace washing over him. "You don't." For the first time, Lyra allowed herself to smile, a small, genuine smile. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And for both of them, that was enough. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, they both knew they were ready to face it together. The peace didn't last long. Even though the alien hunters had retreated, Alex and Lyra knew their problems were far from over. The battle had been won, but the war wasn't finished. As they made their way deeper into the wilderness, the weight of the moment began to sink in. They had taken down the immediate threat, but Lyra's past was still hanging over them, and Alex felt the tension between them building again. Lyra had always been strong, independent, and determined to do everything on her own. But after the fight, Alex could see cracks in her armor. She was tired, worn down by the years of running and fighting. The truth was, Lyra hadn't just been running from the aliens. She had been running from herself, from her past, from the very things that made her who she was. As they walked in silence through the dense forest, Alex couldn't help but notice the way Lyra's gaze constantly shifted, scanning the shadows as if she were waiting for something to jump out at her. She had been in constant motion for so long that it was hard to imagine her ever truly stopping. But Alex could see the toll it had taken on her, and he didn't know what to do. "You don't have to keep looking over your shoulder," Alex said, trying to break the silence. "You've won. We're safe." Lyra didn't answer right away. She just kept walking, her footsteps steady, but her body tense. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't understand," she said, her voice filled with frustration. "I can't just stop. They'll come for me again. It's only a matter of time." Alex wasn't sure how to respond. He had seen her fight with everything she had, and he admired her strength. But he also saw the pain in her eyes, the fear that was buried deep inside her. He didn't want her to carry that burden alone anymore. "I'm not leaving you," Alex said firmly. "We'll face whatever comes together." Lyra stopped walking and turned to face him. Her eyes were hard, almost cold. She was still keeping him at a distance, but Alex could see the conflict in her. She was pushing him away, but she was also starting to let him in. "You don't know what you're asking for," she said, her voice filled with a mix of fear and anger. "You don't know what's coming. They're not just going to let me go. And when they find me, they'll destroy everything in their path." Alex took a step toward her, not backing down. "Then we'll stop them. Together." Lyra's gaze softened for a moment, but she quickly looked away, as if she didn't want to let herself believe it. "You don't understand," she repeated. "You can't fight this. You don't know what they're capable of." Alex reached out, placing a hand on her arm gently. "I don't care what they're capable of. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." For the first time, Lyra let out a deep sigh, her body sagging with exhaustion. She turned away from him, staring off into the distance. "You should go," she said quietly. "I've dragged you into this long enough. You deserve better than this." Alex shook his head. "No, I'm not leaving you. I don't care what kind of trouble this brings. We'll face it together, no matter what." Lyra stood there in silence for a long moment, her shoulders slumped in defeat. She had been fighting alone for so long, but now, Alex was giving her something she had never allowed herself to have. Someone to rely on. She didn't know how to accept it, but she knew she wasn't ready to face this on her own anymore. A sudden noise from the trees snapped them both back to reality. They weren't alone. Lyra's body tensed, and Alex felt his heart race. From the darkness emerged a new figure, a tall, cloaked individual with glowing red eyes. They moved swiftly, almost silently, and as they stepped into the light, Alex felt a chill run down his spine. "I'm afraid you're mistaken," the figure said, its voice low and menacing. "You think you've escaped, but you're wrong." Alex stepped in front of Lyra instinctively, his body tense. He didn't know who this new threat was, but he knew one thing. They weren't here for peace. Lyra stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. "I knew they'd come," she said through gritted teeth. "This is only the beginning." The figure in front of them stepped out of the shadows, its glowing red eyes fixated on Lyra. Alex stood in front of her, his heart pounding in his chest. The air felt heavy, charged with the promise of danger. This new threat was unlike anything he had faced before. The cloaked figure didn't speak for a moment, just studying them with cold, calculating eyes. Lyra tensed beside him, her entire body coiled like a spring. "I knew they would send someone," she said, her voice quiet but filled with certainty. "They don't stop. They never stop." Alex glanced at her, then back at the figure. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice firm despite the fear rising in his chest. "What do you want?" The figure's lips curled into a thin smile, though it didn't reach its eyes. "What I want is irrelevant," it said, its voice low and haunting. "What matters is that you, both of you, are standing in the way of the inevitable." Alex felt a chill run down his spine. "We won't let you take her," he said, stepping forward, his chest puffing out with determination. He didn't know who this figure was, but he wasn't about to let anyone hurt Lyra. Not now. Not ever. Lyra's hand gently rested on Alex's arm, stopping him. "He's not here to take me," she said softly. "He's here to finish what's already begun." Alex turned to her, confusion flashing in his eyes. "What do you mean?" Lyra's face softened for a brief moment. "This is a part of my past I've been running from. The one thing I've tried to escape. They are the ones who destroyed my people. They're the reason I've been on the run." The figure nodded, its red eyes narrowing. "You're right. Your people are gone because of us. And now you will be the one to pay the price. No one escapes their fate, Princess." Alex could feel the weight of the situation crashing down on him. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something much bigger. Lyra had been running from these forces for so long, and now they had caught up with her. He looked at Lyra, his heart aching. "I'm not leaving you," he said, his voice low but filled with conviction. "Whatever happens next, we'll face it together." Lyra's eyes softened, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she smiled. A real smile. It was small, but it was there. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The figure sneered. "Enough sentimentality," it said, its tone sharp. "You can't fight what's coming. You never could." Lyra stood tall, her energy crackling around her once more. "You don't know me," she said, her voice steady but filled with power. "You don't know what I'm capable of. And you don't get to decide my fate." Before the figure could react, Lyra raised her hand, and a surge of energy shot out from her, striking the cloaked figure with a force that sent it staggering back. The figure recovered quickly, but the shock of her power was enough to momentarily throw it off balance. Alex's heart raced as Lyra continued to press forward, her power surging through her like a storm. The figure seemed taken aback, not expecting this level of resistance. Lyra wasn't just fighting for her survival anymore. She was fighting for everything she had lost and everything she had yet to find. The figure glared at her, its expression hardening. "You will regret this, Princess," it hissed. "The price you'll pay for defying us will be more than you can imagine." But Lyra didn't flinch. "I've been paying the price for far too long," she said quietly, her eyes unwavering. "And I'm done." In that moment, Alex knew something had shifted inside her. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. She was fighting for her future, for a chance to be free. And no one, not even this powerful figure, could take that from her. The figure hesitated, clearly sensing the change in Lyra. It took a step back, its red eyes flickering with uncertainty. "This isn't over," it warned. "We'll see about that," Lyra said, her voice steady. The figure vanished into the shadows, leaving Alex and Lyra standing together, breathing heavily from the confrontation. The danger was still there, lurking in the shadows, but for the first time, Lyra didn't look over her shoulder. She was ready to face whatever came next. "We've won for now," Alex said, his voice filled with relief. Lyra nodded, her eyes softer than before. "For now," she agreed. "But this is only the beginning." And for the first time, Alex wasn't afraid. He was by her side, ready for whatever came their way. Together, they could face anything.